Hey everybody, welcome to Tuesday, right? Yeah, it's Tuesday. We are doing this good old stay at home order, so I don't know how everybody out there is doing with it, but I'm doing okay. And if I told the truth, I did go out a little bit today. But anyway, come on in. It's Lipstick Dialogue. Yeah, I want to have a conversation about marriage and the difference between marriages today and marriages of old, like our grandparents' marriages, our parents' marriages. Like, what is it that is causing such a high divorce rate? I mean, it shouldn't be a big secret that the divorce rate is extremely high nowadays. But yeah, and I also hear people, with their 2 and their 3 cents as it relates to marriage. But I thought this would be a good lipstick dialogue conversation for tonight. So I'll wait for you all to come on. I hope that everybody is having a great Tuesday when you come on. If you don't mind, so that I know that I'm not having the conversation by myself, if you will give me some hearts, give me some thumbs, say hello, do something again, so that I know that I'm not talking to myself. And trust me when I tell you, I promise I won't be here long. I'm trying to be gone by 9 o'clock p.m. But again, let's have this conversation. Let's talk about it. Let's talk about marriages today versus marriages of old, right? Is it till death do us part anymore? Or is it until I find somebody better? Because that kind of seems like what it is when you look at all the different shows and you look at all the images that are being presented as it relates to marriage. And then also when you check out the statistics. So again, when you come on, if you'll wave at me, if you'll say hello, we're going to go ahead and have this conversation. And then we're going to move forward. So anyway, let's talk a little bit about marriage. Like, what is it that's happening in our society as it relates to today that cause such a high divorce rate? You know what I mean? I hear so many times, depending on who you're talking to, I've heard men say because there are no good women out here, or they're not women like their grandmother or like their mother. But I've also heard women say it's because there are no good men out here. There are no good men. This is what I've heard people say. They say because there's no good men out here, or you hear men say because there's no good women out here. But at the end of the day, what is it that has happened as it relates to marriage that we can't seem to get it together as a society or as a group of people? And why is the divorce rate so high? And again, these are not law, the things that I'm talking about. This is just my opinion, my belief. And of course, I want you to chime in. But one of the things that I believe that impact marriage today is our perception of marriage, or what it is that we believe marriage is, right? See, that if you enter into a marriage for the wrong reason, without really getting the counseling that you need, or whatever you need, so that you have a full understanding of what it is you're about to enter into, I believe that sometimes that adds to the problem, because you're entering into the dynamic unaware, right? And so that when life happens, because life will always happen, because you didn't have any type of foundation, or you didn't have any type of counseling, or you didn't even have any type of example that will show you how to maneuver through the hard times in marriage, I believe that is one of the reasons why marriages don't last today the way that they did back in the day, right? Here's the other thing. And we're still talking about if you get married for the wrong reason, right? I think that sometimes people make connections for convenience, right? Sometimes people marry people for the fact that they may have some money, or because it's some type of benefit by connecting to them, right? And so what happens that if they marry for a partnership, or they marry, or someone gets married because of the benefit that comes with being married, then once that benefit no longer exists, and when life happens in that marriage will not be able to stand. Why? because the reason that you got married was the wrong reason, right? So back in the day, and I read this today actually, I read that the reason that marriages back then lasted and the marriages today don't last has nothing to do with whether people are better today or they were better back then. Because infidelity still happened back then. It's a lot of people got outside children, so we know those things happened back then. Domestic abuse, all of that existed back then. But the reason that marriages lasted is because of tradition and duty. That when people connected back then and they got married, they took it seriously, right? They weren't just getting married just to be getting married, but they made a connection, understanding that there was a duty and understanding that there was a responsibility that came with this type of connection, right? And because they understood back then that this was tradition, right? That's the mindset of back then. It was about tradition, it was about duty, and it was about creating legacy. And because that was the mindset that they went in with, even when things happened, and I'm talking about real life stuff like outside children, I'm talking about domestic violence, I'm talking about the finances not being what they should be. Because of the mindset that they went in, that's why they fought harder, because they understood that marriage was work, that it required work, right? They understood that everything is not going to always go your way, and that marriage, at the end of the day, when the dust settles, it requires some level of compromise, that marriage required some level of working together. And a lot of times, even back in the day, the women stayed at home, right? Everybody had defined roles, that the women stayed at home, they were homemakers, they were mothers, they took care of the children, and they took care of the household, and that the fathers or the husbands, they took care of their role as being the provider, right? Even when things were going left, right? Even when things were going left, men back then still understood that they still had a responsibility to take care of their home, that they still had a responsibility, whatever other habit they had, whether it was drinking, whether it was women, whether it was gambling, they still understood that they had a responsibility. The problem today is we don't understand that we have a responsibility, that when you connect with somebody else and that you enter into a marriage, there is a responsibility or a sense of accountability that comes with connecting, right? So now what happens is we think about self. Back then, marriages, people didn't connect because they were just thinking about themselves. They were thinking about their legacy. They were thinking about when they joined these two families together, how they could increase that legacy. They were thinking about their children, sending their children to college and making sure that their children were better than they were, right? They had goals. They had purpose, right? Whenever they got married back then. Now we don't have goals and we have purpose. We just don't, not on the same level. And because women now are more independent, women now have more opportunities, right, to be able to take care of themselves. And we push this narrative of women live, and we push this narrative of independence. I am not saying that women should not be independent, but you should not be independent to the point that you are not able to connect in a marriage. Listen, I'll tell anybody any day that whenever you as a woman connect in a marriage, you are not the leader. You should not have a desire to be the leader. And if you cannot trust the person that you've connected to effectively lead your family, then that was not the person you were supposed to connect to. But back in the day, men understood their roles as leaders, right? And they led their families. But also women understood their roles as being a support system. I'm telling you, I know what I'm talking about. I watched my mom every single day, that whenever my father arrived home, and you could set your clock by my father, he arrived home at 6 o'clock. It didn't matter when we lived in New York, when we lived in North Carolina, you could set your clock by my father. But when my father arrived home, my mother had dinner prepared. When my father arrived home, any issues or any problems, she saved until he had an opportunity to unwind from his day of work. But he went to work, right? He went to work. He used whatever. My father did not have a college degree. He did not have a fancy business, but he used whatever skill set and whatever talent that he had. He used it to be a provider and to take care of his family and to take care of his wife. He stood 10 toes down as the leader. But unfortunately, nowadays, the roles have reversed. And so what you have, marriages are no longer balanced because now women, and I understand that some of the reason that there's no balance is because women don't have another choice, right? I understand that some of the reason why women have been forced in this leadership or this super independent mindset or mode is because they didn't have another choice. But again, the reason why marriages today seem to fail and there is no longevity is because our mindset is completely different today. Everybody today is about securing the bag. Everybody today is about self. Everybody today is all about me, myself, and I, right? And so much so that even when they enter into relationships with other people and we get married with this same mindset. We're getting married with the same me, myself, and I mindset. And then you wonder, so as soon as something doesn't go your way, because people came in with this individualized mindset, not even realizing this is duty, this is accountability, this is tradition. They have no real pride in marriage. Today, people don't see, you can say it, but people don't see marriage as honorable, right? People don't see marriage as honorable. And I'm not saying that the same things that happen today, they were happening back then. We just didn't hear about it, but they were happening back then. Some of y'all got cousins or friends or aunties that's really your daddy girlfriend. Some of y'all got cousins that's really your brothers and sisters because stuff was still happening back then, right? But women understood their role and their responsibility, that I am still accountable to this marriage, that I am still accountable to this home, and that regardless of what storm comes, I'm going to honor, right? I'm going to honor the commitment that I made to God, right? I'm going to honor the commitment. They didn't want to embarrass their families, right? They didn't want to embarrass themselves, right? And so marriage back then, man, people took it like, it was nothing to play with. Marriage was important, right? People weren't just doing it because they didn't want to burn in sin. People weren't, and then nowadays people aren't even really getting married like that. They're okay with just shacking up, right? And I'm not here to judge. I'm not here to talk about anybody, but people are just okay with shacking up because they don't want to make a real commitment. Why? Because people are we just thinking about self. We are a selfish group of people now. Generation X, millennials, we're selfish. All we think about is ourselves. We want everything quick, fast, and in a hurry. We expect everything to go our way, the way we want it, when we say we want it, right? And because of that mindset, that's why marriages don't work. We don't understand tradition. We have no real values as it relates to marriage, right? We have no real expectation as it relates to marriage. I've heard people say, if this don't work out, I could go get me another one. What? That's already a bad sign. Marriages back then, they lasted 50, 40, whatever, 30 some odd years because people put the work in. Even when it got hard, they didn't give up. They didn't quit. Because when you're blending people's personalities and when you're blending people's lives, listen, it's going to take work. And then you also have to consider that back in the day, people got married younger, right? People got married younger. So a lot of times they grew up together, right? So whatever they built, whatever they acquired, they had to build it together. It's harder when you're an older person or you're an older adult and you have worked really hard to build your life and then you try to get married later in age or later in life. Sometimes that's hard because you are so used to being independent. You are so used to calling the shots, especially as a woman. And it's not always easy to relinquish the reins, especially if that's what we're used to doing, right? So I believe that age also plays a difference in why marriages today don't last, or why marriages today aren't even happening compared to marriages back in the day, right? Because again, back in the day, they got married younger. So anything they built together. Any type of success they had that success together. They grew together. They matured together. They learned life together, right? We don't do that now. I even see married couples. And oh, wait. Here's the other reason why I believe marriages today don't last or not like marriages of old. Because back then, they didn't have all this technology. They didn't have all this Facebook, social media, phones, all of this, right? So today, all of those things have become distractions for relationships and marriages, right? People be in the same house, in the same room, but everybody's on their phone. Everybody's checking their social media. Or I've seen people in the same house and one person in one room because they got a man cave, and the other person in another room because she got a she cave. But all of that is producing separation. Right? That's not working to put your marriage together. That's not working to make your partnership, you know what I mean, together. That's not promoting togetherness. All of that promotes a sense of self, because I need some time by myself, or I need me. But why get married if you don't want to, you know what I'm saying, if you don't want to promote togetherness? Back then, they didn't have all of that. So they were forced to spend time together. They were forced to be in the same space and to get to know each other, right? To really get to know each other. I promise you, it's people who are married to people, and I promise there's a lot of stuff they don't know about them. Why do you think people are able to have multiple families and have other relationships and they're married? Why do you think they're able to do that? Right? Because we're not promoting togetherness. People get married and it's like, oh, well. People get married, why? Because they want the rent to be cheaper. People get married because they don't want to be alone. I promise you, I just heard this today, that someone said that they did not want to be alone and that they wanted to get married because they did not want to die alone. Now, I understood what they were saying, but if you think about that, like, what is that to build a marriage on? Just because you don't want to die alone? Marriages are different. Marriages are way different today, right? Because we don't have the same tenacity. We don't have the same mindset as our fathers and our mothers. We don't have the same mindset, right? We don't even have the same goals. We don't operate under the same principles that our parents and that our grandparents did. That's why everything we do is different. Back in the day, our parents didn't need degrees and they didn't need a lot of money, but they can make life happen, and they can make life happen big, right? And they weren't preparing for themselves when they got married. They were preparing for the legacy. They were preparing for their children and for their grandchildren. But we don't think like that now. We are self-centered. We are a self-centered group of people, and all that we care about is ourselves and what pleases ourselves, what pleases me. Right? And that is why people struggle in marriages. That is why the divorce rate is so high, because people are quick to be like, listen, I ain't got to put up with this. I could go get me somebody else. I ain't got to put up with this. Right? I've heard people say it. I've heard people say, I make too much money to put up with this. I've heard people say that. I look too good to put up with this. These are things that I have actually heard people say. And that is why marriages today are nothing compared to marriages back in the day. And again, it's not because the women were better. It's not because the men were better. Because I promise you, whatever you see happening today was happening back then. You know what I mean? People didn't just start cheating on their spouses. They been cheating on their spouses. Huh? People didn't start just, you know what I mean, having habits. They been having habits. Right? But our priorities are off now. Generation X millennials, our priorities are off. We don't care nothing about saving no money. We just trying to keep up with the Joneses. Who got the fancier car? Who got the fancier house? Who all labeled down? Our priorities are off. Right? Back in the day, it was about building and acquiring, getting some land, building a house, having something to show for life. We don't have that same mindset. And because